All right, we are actually nearing the end of the book of Romans. We are hoping to do 2 chapters this week, chapters 12 and 13, 2 chapters next week, 14 and 15, and then end with chapter 16 the week after that. That being said, what is coming next, starting the second week of November, is we are going to spend from then till the rest of the year looking forward to the 3-year plan that will start on the first week of January. If you don't know, our church has been formulating church leadership in conjunction with the Center, an outside organization we brought in to help us. We have been working to put together a 3-year plan and we are going to be talking about at least the first year of that over the few weeks that end out this year so that we can get a running start on the first week of January. As far as today, in the book of Romans, we're going to be in chapters 12 and 13. And if you remember back a few weeks, when I was preaching about the fact that we have no condemnation now that we are in Jesus Christ, the fact that God has come to a point where he is not holding our sin against us anymore, that we can live in the freedom that comes with knowing that we have been made right with God. I said, there's nothing we can do to make God love us more. And there's nothing we can do to make God love us less. That is established, and we can live in that freedom. I said, but some of you would struggle with that idea because you know that the Bible gives us a lot of things that we're supposed to do. And how does that jive if what we're supposed to do doesn't actually have any effect? And I said, well, what I wanted you to do was to live in the freedom of chapter 8 until we got to chapter 12, where some of your fears might be assuaged. Well, we're here now. We are going to spend all morning today on a single theme, which is the idea of how does anybody choose to be a good boy?
Dear Diary, today I found out being a good boy is not a permanent thing. It's just a temporary thing. I ate the chimichangas off the countertop. Tony called me a bad dog. After all these years of being a good boy, I guess now I'm just a bad dog. Was I ever a good boy? How long will I be a bad dog? Every day I learn more and grow stronger, closer to being a good boy. Move.
Wait, Sharon, let me see the box. Give me the box. Hold it.
What, you know why cats call soda pop?
Pop!
She got one. It's a big one. She got rain. That's a big one. Look at that fish.
See, dog that fishes. Yeah, it's all meter dog. Yeah. All right. We are going to spend time talking about being a good boy today, and I am going to use that phrase a lot. It is interchangeable. I can mean good boy, it can also mean good girl. What it means is, what does it mean to be a good person? And so I thought if Paul is going to talk about that today, after seeing those examples, we should spend some time talking about it. So I'm actually going to ask 2 questions, give you equal time for both, 2.5 minutes for each question this morning. So feel free to get into your groups. And the first question I would like you to discuss for 2.5 minutes is, what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be good? I'll give you 2.5 minutes on that question. As soon as I get my clock up, so you get extra time right now. Go. Ten, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right. So for the second 2.5 minutes, it's a follow-up to this question. It's a follow-up question. What does it mean to be good? The question is, if we are all equally broken, how can we be good if we are broken? How can we be good if we are broken? Go. Halfway. 30 seconds. Ten, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right. So these are the questions that Paul is going to answer for us this morning. We are going to be in Romans chapters 12 and 13. But by way of review, what we have seen so far is that Paul's main ideas have consisted of thus. First, everyone is equally broken. This is the idea that he has been talking about from the very first chapter of Romans all the way up until now. And it's this idea that there is no one who has ever lived, who lives now, or whoever will live, who is more broken than me. But on the same note, there is no one who has ever lived, lives now, or will ever live, who is less broken than me either. We are all equally broken. There has only ever been one person who is not equally broken. And if you don't know who that is, I would love to tell you all about him after the service. But everyone is equally broken. As a result, we all need to be fixed. And that justification, that taking what was broken, taking what was wrong, what was evil, and declaring it to be good, and not just declaring it to be good, but actually making it good, that justification, that fixing of our brokenness is not something that we can do. We can't fix it. It only comes by faith. Faith that Jesus Christ did that for us on the cross. Faith that God is the one who has made us right. We've seen that justification brings with it benefits. This idea of eternal life, the fact that from this moment on, I can look forward to living forever with God. This idea of sanctification, the fact that God is in the process of transforming me. From the moment that I become a follower of Jesus, God is transforming you to be like Jesus. And the fact that we do live with no condemnation, because if the God of the universe, through the justification process, has made us right and no longer condemns us, no longer holds it against us, no one else has the right to do so either. They're just some of the benefits that come from justification, which we find through faith. And then last time we saw that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That this is an offer, this offer of justification that comes by faith is an offer that is open to everyone. Anyone can make this decision to come to Jesus and be saved. So that's what Paul has said up until this point, which is significant because here's how he starts chapter 12. He says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers. Full stop. Full stop for two reasons. First, because you got to put in the corny pastor joke here. Anytime you see a therefore, you got to figure out what it's there for. Check that box. Corny joke done. Moving on. It's also because Paul is making a major shift in this book. You saw last week that chapters 1 through 11 came to a conclusion. He had this doxological summary at the end of chapter 11, wrapping up that brick of information. And now Paul is going to make a shift. And he starts here, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers. What he's saying is everything that I am about to say in chapters 12 and 13 is based on everything I've already said in chapters 1 through 11. He is drawing our attention to the fact that you must understand and comprehend what we have seen in chapters 1 through 11 before starting chapter 12. This is important because I have seen many people use chapter 12 specifically, especially these first few verses, to beat people over the head into submission because they did not understand that it is built on chapters 1 through 11. We have to come into this with this understanding that what Paul has already said is everyone is equally broken. There is nothing we can do to fix that. Only God can fix that. He is the one who has justified us through faith. He is the one who's given us the benefits that come with justification. And that if we are going to be saved, the only way to do that is to call on his name. If we don't understand that first, we can go with some really crazy directions with what comes next. So with that said, he says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, because of everything we've just heard, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So one of the keys to understanding these verses is to look at the verbs, specifically verb tenses. So we're going to go back to English class, and we're going to talk about verb tenses this morning. Yay! All right. We're going to try to make it easy, though. His first verb, present. Paul says, present yourself. What is the verb? Present. What is the verb tense? Who is the person doing this verb? The reader, you, me, whoever's reading it, right? We are being told to present ourselves. What must be done in order to present oneself? Show up. Absolutely. The illustration I have is my wife got this really nice letter from the state of New York earlier this week, end of last week, earlier this week. And when she opened it, there were instructions inside that were requiring her to present herself in Buffalo this coming week for grand jury duty. Yes, she gets to go fulfill her civic duty on a grand jury. She must present herself at the courthouse for this experience. What must she do in order to fulfill that requirement? She must show up. That is what is required. Does she have to wear a special dress or outfit to fulfill the requirement of present yourself? No. In fact, if you've ever served on jury duty, I had someone last night say you might as well show up in your pajamas because no one cares. Does she have to do her hair a certain way to have fulfilled the requirement to present herself? No. Does she have to go and study the law such that she understands all the legal requirements necessary to adjudicate a case in order to fulfill the requirement of presenting herself? No. All she has to do is show up. So far we have been told by Paul that we need to show up. Present yourself. Next one's a bit of a trick question, though. Who is doing the action when Paul tells us, don't be conformed? I could see how you got there, yes. The trick question part of this is no one, because the action is to not do something. Don't do things. So there is no action to be done here. It is simply telling you to not do an action. Not be conformed, not be changed by the world that is around you. So when the world wants you to change, when the world comes and says, I am insisting that you do things my way, all you have to do is not that. Don't be conformed. Say, no, not going to do it. Here's the interesting one. Be transformed. Third verb. Who's doing the action in this one? God is somewhat implied. But the only thing we can say for certain is not you. This is something that is happening to you. When he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, what he's saying is your mind is going to change and you are going to be transformed. It actually comes in an interesting way because of the two different words that are used here. I wanted to know why we would use conformed for change of the world and transformed by the renewing of your mind. So I looked up what is the difference. What does it mean to be conformed versus what does it mean to be transformed? To be conformed is to be changed from the outside in. To be transformed is to be changed from the inside out. I do not believe the translators chose these words by accident. It is exactly what Paul is trying to point out here. He is saying, present yourself, show up. Don't let the outside world change who you are, but instead, when God gives you a new mind, as God starts to sanctify you from the inside out, allow yourself to be transformed to be more like Jesus. He says, if we do this, if we show up, if we resist being conformed to the world, if we allow Jesus to transform us from the inside, then what we will do is we will be able to discern the will of God. In other words, if we do these things, we will be able to know what God wants us to do. If you have ever asked yourself, I want to know what the will of God is. God, show me your will for my life. This is how he says you do it. Or if I can put it in the silly theme of the morning, this is how we know how to be a good boy. Show up, don't be conformed, be transformed. From here, Paul says, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them, if in prophecy, in proportion to our faith, if in service, in our serving. The one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, and the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. So what Paul is saying is this is how you discern the will of God, and now he's going to give some examples of what the will of God is for us to discern. He says first, he starts within the church. And his first message, talking about doing the will of God inside the church, is this: you are not as special as you think. He says, I would urge people to not think of themselves more highly than they ought. Because each and every one of us, myself included, each and every one of us have this internal tendency to think, I have a pretty good idea what's going on. And you know, if they would just listen to me, we'd be okay. If people did things my way, everything would work out just fine. And while we may not say that often, a lot of times how we act is based on that. And what Paul is saying is, no, you're not quite as special as you think you are. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to say, but you are special. You are necessary. You are a value member inside of the church. God has equipped you with gifts. God has made you as an individual. There is only one Zeb Leffler, and we need him. There's only one Josh Manchester, and we need him. There's only one Mark Almeter, we need him. Each and every person in this room, there's only one of you. And God has equipped you to be a part of a church body, to participate, and as a result, you are needed. We cannot function the way God intended for us to function if you are not fulfilling the role that God has intended for you to fill. So while we may not be as special as we think, and we may need to check ourselves every once in a while to say, yeah, maybe I don't have every answer all the time, we do need to show up and do the things that God has called us to do, to participate and be a part of the body. He continues, and I apologize for this. I meant to split this into 2 slides, and I forgot again. He says, let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be consistent in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So right after talking about discerning the will of God and talking about our role in the church, Paul launches into this list, this massive list. And there's this thing about Pauline lists that Paul has written in the epistles, that we oftentimes fall into this trap. We think that Paul is writing exhaustively, that he is covering every possible example. It is not generally the case that Paul does that. Most of the time when Paul is writing a list, he is giving general examples, ideas of things that we should be doing. For example, when he writes to Timothy about the qualifications for a pastor, he lists like 7, 8 things in there that every pastor should do, every pastor should be. It was never meant to be an exhaustive list. It's not like if you check these 7 or 8 boxes, that makes you a good pastor. This is the type of person you are looking for when you're looking for a pastor. In the same way, he is now giving a list of things that are necessary, that are to fulfill the will of God. This is never meant to be an exhaustive list, though. Because remember, back to his main point, if you show up, refuse to be conformed to the world, and allow yourself to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, you will be able to discern the will of God. He is just giving some examples of what that would look like played out. And it's this. First and foremost, he says, love. What is love? Love your neighbor as yourself. Treat your neighbor as yourself. It says, be the best preferer. What this means is that when it comes to your good idea versus another person in the church's good idea, we should be anxious to prefer what works best for the other person. He says, outdo each other. Paul actually uses one of his crazy ideas here, this idea that we would make this a competition. And that the only fights we would ever have in the church would be like at an annual business meeting where we would have one person on one side going, man, his idea is so awesome. We should totally do it his way because it'll make life better for everybody like him. And man, he is awesome. Well, on the other side, the person's going, no, we should never do my idea. My idea is horrible compared to his idea. We should do his idea. It's so much better than my idea. And we should spend the whole time fighting about the fact that somebody else's idea is better than ours. He says we should be trying to outdo each other, competing with each other to see who could prefer others more. He says, rejoice, be patient, and pray. These are all in conjunction here, talking about times of suffering, that when God brings hard times in our life, we should find opportunities to rejoice, we should be patient and wait on God, and we should pray. He says we should contribute. He actually talks about it both in the sense of time. We should be contributing to the church with our time, our resources, our energy, but also he's talking about our finances here. The fact that none of this was free. We built this building, we have these pews, we heat the building, we light the building. All the things we do cost money, and we come together, each and every one of us, to contribute to that end. He says, bless those who hurt you. Bless those who hurt you. Do life together. This is the idea that we should not just see each other on Sundays. That if we're going to do life together, if we're going to do church well, if we're going to discern the will of God, we need to see each other during the week. This can be as simple as, I'm going grocery shopping. Who can I invite to go grocery shopping with me? To, I'm going through a tragic time in my life and I need someone to talk to. It can be both ends of the spectrum and everything in between. We should be seeking to spend time together with other members of the church. To spend time with those who make you uncomfortable. It says, spend time with those who make you uncomfortable. There are people in this world who don't just make us uncomfortable by their attitude, but maybe they're struggling with something that you're not. And it makes you uncomfortable to spend time with someone who's struggling with something you're not. Or maybe it makes you uncomfortable to spend somebody who has a radically different point of view than yourself. It says we should be actively trying to spend time with those who make us uncomfortable. It says, don't think you know everything all the time. To that I say, ouch, let's move on to the next one. But Paul's saying, look, remember, we don't have all the answers. You don't know everything all the time. Live in peace and don't seek revenge. And then finally he concludes this whole section, this whole list of good things that we should do with know that good wins. Do not be overcome by evil. When you experience evil in this world, don't let it overwhelm you, but instead overcome evil with good. Know that as we are doing these things that are the will of God, as we are striving to serve God, good will win out in the end. It may not look like it now, it may not look like it for a while, but at the end of the day, we know that good will win. It says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. This may seem like a shift to you. I don't think it is. I think 13 is very much meant to flow into Paul's list here. He says, let every person be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of the conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. What Paul is saying is all authority comes from God. Anyone who is in authority over you has been placed in that position of authority by God. Whether that is your parents who are in authority over you at this phase in your life, whether that is your boss at work, whether that is your mayor, your president, all authority that has been given on this planet comes from God. And what Paul says is to resist that authority. To resist that authority is to resist God. It says to set yourself against the authority in your life, to disobey, to rebel against that authority is to resist, to disobey, or to rebel against God. It says because authority only punishes what is evil. So if you do good, you should have nothing to fear from your authority. If you are doing good, if you're doing the things that Paul just talked about, there should be no reason why you should ever worry about your authority. You should be able to subject to them perfectly. Anybody else uncomfortable with that? Anybody else uncomfortable with what Paul has just said? Because it is absolutely what Paul is saying here. But we know we live on a broken planet. And it causes us to ask this question, what about evil authority? Because there has certainly been evil authority. I don't need to tell you that. We have all seen evil authorities. We can go to the big one. Adolf Hitler. Evil authority. No one is in debate over whether or not that was an evil authority. What Paul is saying here is that God is the ultimate authority. God is the one who is over all authority. God is the one from whom all authority flows. Which means that if authority leaves the authority of God, if authority steps outside of God's will, they are no longer functioning in the role that God has given them. But that is extremely rare. I do not believe what God is saying is that just because we don't like what authority is doing, they have stepped outside of God's will. Just because authority is doing something that makes us uncomfortable, they have stepped outside of God's will. When authority comes to you and says, I want you to sin, the answer is no, because there's an ultimate authority above you. When authority comes to you and says, I expect you to pay your taxes, Paul says, no, that is fully within their rights. That is fully within the authority that God has given them. You pay your taxes. And he continues on to say that to owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. It says, owe no one anything. If you owe your taxes, pay your taxes so you owe no one anything. If you owe someone honor, give them honor so that you owe them nothing. It says, owe no one anything except for one thing: love. It says, each and every one of us are called to love one another. We owe it to one another to love each other well. And in so doing, he says, you have fulfilled all the rest of the law. Love covers everything. So he's starting to wrap up this idea where he's saying, you want to discern the will of God? You want to know how to be a good boy, good girl? Love well. And all those other things that we're supposed to be doing, it's going to lead you to do those things too. And then he finally bookends it with this. He says, besides this, you know the time, that the hour has come for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. The night is far gone, the day is at hand. So then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in the quarreling and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. He starts with the end is nearer now than ever. And I have heard people run crazy directions with this, how we need to start prepping and being ready for the end times because Paul is saying that the end times are coming now. He was absolutely saying that 2,000 years ago. So now might be a relative term. What Paul is saying is every day we live, we are one day closer to the end. Yeah, that's how time works. We move in a singular direction with time. Every day, the end is nearer now than ever. But having that mindset, he says, so stop procrastinating. If there's something in your life that you know is evil, stop doing what you know is evil. It says instead, live in the righteousness of Jesus. And I said this is a bookend because basically what he is saying is don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Live in the righteousness of Jesus. There's a concept in a book called Rare Leadership. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. It is a nerdy book, though. It's a whole lot of science. But he talks about this concept of acting yourself. And in that section, what he talks about is the fact that accountability groups don't work. They have been systematically shown to fail because an accountability group, by its very nature, focuses on everything you have done wrong and tries to fix it. He says instead, what has been shown to actually work is instead of focusing on the bad, focusing on how you messed up and putting all your attention there, he says you should call people to act themselves, to recognize that the wrong things they've done are not who they are and that they are better than. And call them to, encourage them to act like that, act like themselves. And while that was novel to read for me, it is nothing new. Paul is here saying this in a different way. What he's saying is we need to live into the righteousness of Jesus. We need to be transformed from the inside out. And he says the way to do that is to recognize when Jesus Christ died for you, when you became a follower of Jesus Christ, he gave you his righteousness. You now have the righteousness of Jesus in your life. So when God looks at you, he doesn't see you, he sees Jesus. And you get all the credit for all the good that Jesus has ever done. So when we come together as a church, as a body, and we see that, and you make a mistake, when you mess up, when you make a bad decision, it should not be, we should not spend all our time telling you how bad your decision was and focusing on how badly you messed up and how awful you are, but rather say, hey, God has called you to something greater. God has made you something greater. God has given you his righteousness. I know you can be this. I know you can be what God has made you to be and encourage people to move in that direction. It's not about the checklist. It's about living into the righteousness, living into who we already are because of Jesus and what he did for us. So what? 3 questions today. First, is there any part of yourself that you have not surrendered to Jesus? Is there any part of yourself that you are saying, God, I am all yours. I want to be your follower. I want to be a disciple of Jesus, except for this. This is mine. I want to hold on to this. This you can't have. This is my precious. Is there any part of yourself that you have not surrendered to Jesus? Are you holding on to stuff that you know isn't right? Is there anything that you are doing, anything that you are thinking, anything you are keeping for yourself that you know is not okay? It says, finally, what do you need to change to be the person that Christ has made you to be? Because here's the truth. Christ has already declared you to be righteous. He has already given you his righteousness. Anything in your life that you need to change isn't because you're being punished for doing the wrong thing. Instead, it's because you need to act like the person Christ has made you already. Let the outside start to show what he has already done on the inside as we start to look more like Jesus. And Paul's point is, why wait? We're one day closer to the end than we've ever been before. Why wait to take care of this stuff? Do it today. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you don't require me to be the one to do this work, that you have already done this work inside of me. I pray that you would peel away the layers and let it start to come out. Let it start to be influential and exciting and admiration. That all of the things as people see you, they start to look more like you on the outside. I pray that for our entire church, every individual, but then our church as a body as well. That we would be people who look like what you have already declared us to be. Little mini Jesuses all over the place.